Yeah.
Is it?
Hello. I think we're live. Hello and welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us for ProCanna's 21st LinkedIn Live event, Getting Started with GMP Compliance, What You Need to Know. My name is Dede Perkins. I am one of the co-founders and I'm the CEO of ProCanna, which is an intelligent tool that increases compliance and operational excellence and eases the pain of maintaining it across any cannabis organization. I am very pleased to say that with me today is Chris Budd, co-founder of Isolocity, which is a GMP-validated quality management system, or QMS. Chris began his quality assurance career working for Magna International in corporate quality systems. After Magna, he earned an MBA at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, while simultaneously launching his consulting practice, CJB Consulting Limited. CJB began consulting in the design and deployment of ISO and GMP QMS systems in a wide variety of businesses. And the Isolocity software was launched in 2016 as a way to eliminate all paper and labor associated with quality compliance. Today, Isolocity is used by businesses on every continent, which is very cool. And Chris is an IRCA certified quality systems auditor, and he is also a Six Sigma black belt. So for the next 20 minutes or so, we will be talking about getting started in GMP, or good manufacturing practices. And specifically, we are going to cover exactly what GMP is and why it's important in the US cannabis industry, the 5 main components of GMP, the primary steps one should take when implementing good documentation practices, the measures you should take, number 1, to ensure a clean facility, and number 2, good employee hygiene. What is traceability and CAPA for adverse events and why are they important? And finally, how does one get GMP certified? So we are going to save a couple minutes at the end to address any questions that you have. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will address them. If there are questions that we don't get to answer, feel free to reach out to either one of us after the event. And now I am happy to introduce Chris Budd. Chris, maybe start off by telling us how you got in the cannabis industry.
Thanks, Dede. Well, thanks for having us. It's great to be here. Isolocity, we kind of just fell into the cannabis industry 5 or 6 years ago in the legal market in Canada. We're based out of the Toronto area, and Health Canada was part of the legalization process in the cannabis space. And when they came forth with their requirements for producers, part of it had a strong emphasis on quality assurance and quality management. And so Isolocity, as being a young business back in those days, we felt it was a great opportunity to jump in and help the cannabis producers in the Canadian market simplify and make those record-keeping requirements much easier for them to manage.
Very
So
cool.
that's how we got into it. And from there, we've grown into 14 or 15 international markets in cannabis use case related activities. So it's pretty exciting where we've come from and where we are right now.
Very cool. All right, well, we have lots to cover, so we'll jump right in. Let's start by, just the basics. What exactly is GMP? I think there's a lot of confusion around it. And why is it important in the United States cannabis industry, in your estimation?
Well, let's sort of take a step back. Let's take a step back from just the cannabis industry. And let's just talk about all industries, all products that touch our bodies, that we eat, inhale, or ingest. Every single product that we put into our bodies or onto our bodies is produced in a GMP facility. Now, why is this important? Because the whole intent of GMP is to protect the consumer, is to ensure the product is being manufactured in a clean and safe environment. And therefore, the consumer should have a product that meet local and international regulation requirements, but on top of that, too, is free of contamination. So why is it important to the US cannabis industry? Because this is not necessarily regulated right now across the board, with the exception of a handful of states in the United States. Most organizations in the US in the cannabis space do not have to comply to these regulations. So it puts the consumer at risk because essentially there is no standardized mandate to ensure that product is being manufactured free of contamination, or is it being manufactured to set standards. Furthermore, the ability to enact a recall if product is unsafe to consume or is deemed to be dangerous. So I would say it's incredibly important because at this current stage right now, if you're talking from the federal perspective, GMP is not required, but I do believe one day that it will be as more states decriminalize and approve the product for recreation and medical purposes.
And also for export purposes, right?
Yes,
Europe has much higher standards than we do. And so if we, at some point, companies that want to export, they're going to have to meet those higher standards.
that's correct. Yes, absolutely. And it's kind of like if you think of ISO, so International Standardization of Organization, it's one of those things that it just gives exporters and importers the warm fuzzies, knowing that who they're buying from or who they're shipping to has a good quality system in place to uh, verify the product is safe and of good quality.
Okay. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that there are 5 main components to a GMP system. If that's the right number, we'll, confirm that and also tell us what they are. Why is each component there and why is it important?
Yeah, well, bits and bobs of all over the place, but really there are 5 main key milestones. First off, control your documents, and we'll jump into that in a little bit more detail. So you got to have controlled documents. You need to have your employee being trained and have awareness built for compliance reasons. On top of that, to implement good documentation practices, and we'll dig into that in a little bit too. Like, what is a good documentation practice to ensure that everyone's essentially following the same protocols when filling out certain documents? Uh, Having a clean and a clean facility with good emphasis on employee hygiene is also a big component to GMP. And then finally, having a good traceability in place and CAPA for adverse events. And we'll dig into that CAPA terminology as we get down to that subject.
All right. So documentation, let's start there. What are the primary steps one takes
Okay.
to implement? What does it even mean, good documentation practices?
Well, so first let's start about what is a controlled document, right? So uh, the first step there is to gather all that loose paper, and trust me, there is forms everywhere in a company, and so you want to get these forms under control. So you want to understand all the forms that you have right now, who's filling them out, why they're filling them out, and then get an electronic copy of those forms and put into a management system to ensure that you can control your documents. What I mean by control your documents, then provide a revision level and date to that document to ensure that everyone is using the most current document in place. So that would be step number one. Gather your documents and control them. Give them a rev level and a rev number. Then on top of that, you now need to manage access to ensure that only certain people have access to the right documents. So certain people aren't changing the document around because they don't like what it says or how it conveys their requirement. So then having a good control system in place to manage access to the control document, so only certain people and certain functions can access that document and utilize that document. Then you want to manage revisions. So every time you do revise that document, you want to ensure that it goes through what we call a change control process in the GMP world, and that change is approved and any sort of risk assessments are made on the impact of that change. And once that change has been approved by the document owners, then going through and training your employees on the change to ensure that everyone is aware of the change and now can move forward using the new document. Now, that sounds like a lot, but it's actually really relatively easy to implement. And so those are sort of the big pieces there for documentation, getting that started. Now, we talk about good documentation practice. Think about when you're filling out a form, and I think about date codes, right? Everyone has a different way of writing a date code. So good documentation practice comes down to standardizing how you document certain elements of a data piece. So a date code. Is it month, day, year, or is it day, month, year? And having those things standardized is very important. Even when it comes down to the color of pen that you use. Do you want to have your employees using a blue pen, a red pen, a black pen? What do the different colors signify when you're filling out that form? Does a red pen mean a QA overwrite, or does a blue pen mean a production record? So having even the color of pen that you use is relatively important when it comes to good documentation practices, because you want to breed standardization in your form and your record keeping process. So there's some important elements there. And then finally, sort of kind of parlaying into the next subject here, which would be training. So training is is very important when it comes to good documentation practices, because you want to breed that standardization in how you document the data. But there's a big part of documentation that people don't necessarily, good part of training that people don't necessarily consider. And there's two parts of training. There's competency and capability, right? So training your employees on your SOPs and on good documentation practices and various protocols that you want to achieve builds awareness. On top of that, you want to then deem that the individual is competent to complete the task, but also capable to complete the task. So training does require sometimes a bit of a peer review to ensure that that individual, yes, they understand it, but now they can actually complete that task. And me as the supervisor has signed off saying this individual is able to complete that task. Now, this is important because awareness builds alignment, and alignment breeds standardization. And standardization creates a stable and profitable process. So not only from a GMP perspective, but training has a big element when it comes to ensuring alignment, but also making sure that the product's made to specification and is safe to use.
So I have one question about, you talked about the change control process in a
Yeah.
document. Say it's a mid-sized company and there's a manager of the whatever the facility. Does there always have to be two people? I mean, if the manager says, okay, this is the way we're going to do it now, is that the change? How does that work? Like, can one person make a change?
Depending on the size of the facility, it is beneficial to have peer review. And typically, depending on the process, depending on the risk profile of the process as well, too. Like if it's a simple, I'm changing this SOP that surrounds how we make coffee. Okay, great. So maybe the office individual can make that SOP on how you revise the coffee making protocol in the morning, and they can sign off and saying that's great because it's a low risk process. Now, where it might get a little bit more complicated if you're revising how you manufacture or produce that product, then it does consider more of a cross-functional team where it's going to consider production requirements, going to consider QA requirements, it's going to consider the equipment or the facility guys as well too. So that in that type of process where the risk profile is a little bit greater, having a peer review or a cross-functional approach to change control is beneficial to the organization, just to ensure that you don't overlook anything that you haven't considered, because sometimes people just get siloed in their departments and just think about what their department does, but is not considering other departments.
So is a best practice sort of putting SOPs into categories, low risk, medium risk, high risk, this one, or is that just, yeah.
Yeah, categories for risk profile or categories for various departments. And so depending on how you control your documents and how you manage that change control process, there could be automated instruments that can help you route documents through various users or departments for approval. And so you can set it up where you can have sanitation documents, you can have employee hygiene documents, you can have production documents, and have a standard set of rules that every time someone touches a production document, it goes through individuals. So based on that department requirements, that in itself brings its own risk profile. So yeah, it could be done through risk, it could be done through departments, different types of documents. So if it's a generic form, if it's a work instruction or an SOP or a product specification, it can also determine how you want to go about revising that document.
That's great. Okay. So you mentioned sanitation.
Yeah.
The next question is about that. So what are the measures that operators should take to, I guess two different things: ensure a clean facility and good employee hygiene, right?
Right. Absolutely. And so the best way to illustrate this is, let's think of a commercial kitchen, right? Let's think you're in a restaurant and you put yourself in the consumer's shoes. Do you want to be eating food that is prepared in a clean kitchen or a dirty kitchen? So the same principle goes to GMP and mass production of cannabis products, food products, cosmetics, etc. Ensuring that you have a cleaning schedule that is maintained and kept and signed off and verified is a very important element to ensuring that you're going to produce a clean product that is safe and free of contaminants. Furthermore, from an employee hygiene perspective, it all starts from when you walk into the door. And do you put a hairnet on? Do you put coveralls on? Do you have indoor shoes versus outdoor shoes? Do you have shoe covers? So these are all protocols that you can enable that allow you to keep the contamination down within your facility. On top of that, having hand washing stations easily accessible, having signage to reinforce hand washing, so to ensure that employees know they must wash their hands after lunch, after they use the washroom. So just kind of building that awareness and that visual management to really dummy proof the whole process. And then finally, something that does get often overlooked and not really considered, but actually having a proper sick policy. So put yourself again in that commercial kitchen example. Do you want to eat food that someone has been coughing and sneezing over while they're preparing it for you? And my guess is probably no. And so the same goes true as far as any sort of food production facility, cosmetic production facility, or cannabis production facility. You don't want to be inhaling or ingesting that product that someone else's germs are all over, especially if they're not feeling well. So a big part of the employee hygiene policy should be a strong sick policy that allows the supervisor to send someone home if they see that they're not feeling well. So cleaning schedules, make sure product is clean. Sorry, the rooms are clean. The production facilities are clean. You have a good changeover process as well. So if you're using automated equipment and you're producing strain one or product one, and then you're switching over to product two, that production processing equipment goes through a proper changeover and a sanitation to purge out all the existing product of one. So you're ready to produce product two, and there is no contamination or cross contamination between the two products. So cleaning schedules, changeover schedules, or changeover criteria for cleaning and sanitation. Wash your hands, wear hairnets, and don't come to work if you're not feeling well.
Does GMP or QMS systems get into even like what kind of cleaning products are acceptable, or is that just, is that something the state regulates, or it's just they don't get that detailed?
Well, it all depends. It all depends on the type of product. So, if it's a food grade product, there's only certain cleaning solutions you're allowed to use. Of course, you can't use something that is hazardous to consume. So it all depends on the product. It all depends on the state that regulates. Now, where GMP does come in place is that tracking the traceability of cleaning products, because like a raw ingredient and a raw material, which we're going to jump into in a little bit, cleaning products also have their own lot and batch codes and can also be produced incorrectly and have adverse effects. So you also, depending on the level of your GMP and how thorough you want to get with it, tracing the raw materials from a cleaning solution can also be a requirement as well. And often you see this more so in the pharmaceutical world, where they actually identify the product they've used for the cleaning that day or that activity, and the traceability of the lot number of that raw material that was used to clean, just so they have that full traceability in case there's a recall from the cleaning manufacturer. They know where that product ended up and which product was produced on that clean surface, so they know then to recall that product that was produced on that clean surface, for example. But that's traceability. So that's a very long-winded answer, Dede. I'm sorry, but yeah.
No, that was great. But the next question is about traceability and
Right.
for adverse events, right? So,
Yeah.
let's jump right into that. Why are they important? What do we have to trace? We even
Yeah.
have to trace sanitation, solutions. So, yeah, let's jump
Right.
on.
And so this is where you get into ensuring that all raw materials that go into production are inspected to be deemed okay. So this all sort of starts with your receiving inspection process. You bring in a raw material, you bring in consumables, nutrients, additives, anything that comes into your facility, you are going to do your receiving inspection. Part of it to ensure is it safe of contamination? Is it safe to use? Do I have my C of A in place? If the C of A says that this lot number meets the requirements that I want it to meet. Then having that raw material or consumable product go into inventory and then distributed to the production area, where it then gets used to create a finished product, or it gets used to help grow a product, and having those lot numbers then track back to that activity. Now, as your finished product comes off the line or comes out of the grow room, it itself also has its own lot number. So the idea of lot and batch traceability is from when you ship that product to your customer, that you know exactly everything that's gone into it leading up to that point. So from the minute it came into your door from a raw ingredient to the second it left your facility as a finished product, you have full traceability of what's gone into it and where it's gone. And that's important. And if we go back to that example where you have to conduct a recall. So let's say, for example, supplier ABC presented us with ingredient 123. Ingredient 123 has later been found that it is contaminated, or for whatever reason, it doesn't meet the specification. We need to know as a manufacturer where that ingredient ended up in finished product. So then we in turn can then reach out to our distributors, our retail locations, and get that pulled off the shelf, and even put out a general notification to the consumers saying that if you have this product please return it for a refund or a replacement, but please discard of it, etc., and make them aware of the risks of consuming it as well. So traceability is a big part of that. Now, adverse effects or quality events, if you may, the whole notion of documenting quality events surrounding these activities. So when you produce something that's incorrect, or you deviate from a process, or you don't follow a procedure, or something's gone wrong in general, we have a terminology in the industry that we call CAPA, and that is corrective and preventative actions. Now, underneath that umbrella, there is a lot of different other toolkits that you can enact, but let's just sort of focus on solving the problems. So you want to track and manage these problems in a formal capacity, because by doing so, you can then build trend analysis. And when you get audited, your auditors are interested in trend analysis. They want to know what's going wrong and how often is it going wrong. And this isn't a time to lie to your auditor, because auditors are very good at understanding that people are hiding the data. So my one advice is, if you're going through an audit, you be very honest with your auditor, because they want to understand that you have the proper protocols in place to do trend analysis. But more importantly, you're taking preventative actions to reduce the likelihood of those negative trends from reoccurring. So CAPA is an instrument in the QMS world that allows you to understand root cause analysis. Why is that true issue really happening? And then you take preventative action to reconcile that root cause analysis. And for those who aren't familiar with the term root cause analysis, next time you have a problem statement like, why did I got to work late that day, or something like that, ask the question why 5 times. If you ask, why was I late? Well, because the traffic was bad. Why was the traffic bad? Because the infrastructure is out of date. Why is the infrastructure out of date? Because public funding hasn't kept up on it. Why isn't public funding haven't kept on it? Because we're voting for the wrong guy. Okay, so the root cause analysis is that you're voting for the wrong guy. As a funny example, but that's how you can take 5 why analysis and get to the true root cause to why a negative trend is happening, and then understand that trend and take preventative action to prevent it from happening.
Very good. Okay. So taking all that into account, right? The goal is to get GMP certified. So you can put in good manufacturing practices just because that's the way you do it and not get certified, right? But if you want to get certified, can you explain what that process looks like? And yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion. Who certifies you, what the process looks like, what you have to do.
Okay. Absolutely. So there's a couple of different streams you can go. So you talked about you can be compliant but not certified. And that is an option, because sometimes it's more of a customer review. They come in and they do a supplier review of your facility to ensure that you have all the protocols in place that meet their supplier quality requirements. But if you want to get certified, it's typically a 3 to 6 month process. And so all the steps and all the stuff that we've just discussed, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not. I mean, there's quite a bit there, but if you break it down into manageable steps, it's quite easy to achieve. You can hire a consultant that can help you with this. There's some great consultants in the US cannabis space, like the GMP Collective Group, like the Ally Consulting Group. They can help you with that sort of stuff in helping you get GMP certified. But the main thing is finding that registrar, right? So you gotta find a registrar that aligns with your vision, aligns with your timeline of when you want to get certified. And there's various registrars that focus on the hemp and cannabis space in the US. Perry Johnson, for example, is a good registrar for this, or Eagle certification as well too. And so getting in touch with those registrars, getting a contract signed to have them come in when that 3 to 6 month period, once you have everything stabilized and ready to go for review. But before they come in, you need to do your own self-inspection. So we call this what we call an internal audit. And the internal audit is essentially you have individuals from your group, or you have an external party that come in, and they will review your management system, or you review it yourself, and you look at where you're short on meeting your SOPs. And then essentially you take what we call corrective action and reconcile those gaps to then make sure that you're ready to go for your audit. And from there, you can drive some continuous improvement programs and have those then documented to demonstrate to the auditor that not only are you meeting GMP, but you're also taking measures to enhance your compliance to ensure that you get better at it. You're reducing your trend analysis. And auditors like to see that. Auditors want to see progress. They don't want to see a stagnant system. They want to see a system that is moving forward year over year, and it's just not sitting on their initial investment. They're pushing the boundary to bring down the cost of quality, to bring down the defect rate, and to produce essentially a safer product for consumers.
That whole continuous improvement loop. It's not
Right.
one and done, right? It's an ongoing process. Question about the registrar. Are they, private companies? Are they nonprofits? Can anybody? I mean, how do you be, like, how do you know
Yeah.
which sort of, registrar is, are there some
Yeah.
that's better than others?
So that is a very good question, Dede. So you want to work with a registrar that has been accredited by an accreditation body. And this is, we can have a whole seminar on the accreditation bodies and the certification bodies and the registrars. But uh, anyone can go in and say, hey, I think you're compliant to GMP. That's great. Here's a certificate that I've made up on my computer. Well, that's not a certificate you want to have. You want to have a certificate that's provided by a registrar that is accredited by an oversight body for standards like GMP and ISO. So the auditors get audited. So you want to work with the guys who get audited to do your auditing, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. It strikes me as a process that sounds really complex and, but really it gets down to common sense, right? And just, yeah. Okay. So we have about 5 minutes left, and we do have a couple questions from the audience. So let's see one of them. From your point of view, is a HACCP plan part of your recommended GMP process?
Okay. So GMP requires risk management no matter what. So depending on the level of what you're producing. So if you're producing a food product, a HACCP plan is recommended because it manages your contamination points, and you can build out checks and balances to ensure that you're reducing those contamination points at the point of production. So if you're producing something that is like a vape product or a product that you're consuming or you're eating, I would recommend a HACCP or like a safe food plan or a HACCP plan. Hazard analysis, critical control point plan, essentially.
What is a HACCP plan, right? For people aren't familiar.
Okay, so a HACCP plan is essentially looking at the production cycle of a product and looking at where various contamination points can be introduced to that product. And then essentially from receiving inspection to loading the machine to packaging to shipping, there are certain contamination points in a production process. So you want to look at what those contamination opportunities are and then take regular actions and document those actions to suggest that you're doing your best or everything that's within your power to mitigate contamination. So it's essentially contamination management.
Very helpful. Another question: are there certification bodies in Canada?
Yes, there are. Yeah, absolutely. Of course. Perry Johnson operates in Canada. There's a lot of certification bodies. I don't know if Eagle does in Canada. I think they do. I only mention those two because I know they've specialized in the cannabis and hemp related certification pieces, but SGS, BSI, Bureau Veritas, there's quite a few of these certification bodies out there, but not a lot of them will cover hemp and cannabis. There's only a certain few that have taken it on and built out specialized certification schemes for that. So whatever registrar you work with, ensure that they actually have a good program in place. If there's people tuning in who aren't in the cannabis space and in other industries, just make sure you're working with a registrar that has a program in place for your industry. And the two I mentioned, I know have programs in place for hemp and cannabis.
Okay, thank you. Another question: what are the costs associated with GMP certification?
Okay, well, outside of if you're using a consultant to help you, if it's sort of a DIY project, outside of the cost of the internal cost of getting you to that point, I can't comment on that because it can vary. But from a certification process, you're probably looking anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 for the first year. And then every year after that, maybe a little bit less than that, but it all depends on the size of the facility. So it does sometimes matter on the amount of employees that you have. But I would budget for anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 a year. And then knowing that after the first year, it's a little bit less because you don't need to go through that full certification audit where they can do more of a sample set of documents and data points during what they call a surveillance audit period.
Can you tell us how long is a typical, audit? How long are they in your
Yeah.
facility? Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a month?
It's always too long. No, but that's why you want to have a good system in place that allows the auditor to ask less questions. If you're able to give them the data that they need real time, then there's less questions and makes your life much easier. Uh, if you're a 100-person facility, you'll have maybe 4 to 5 man days on site, and that could be 2 auditors for 2.5 days. Uh, and then it can vary. If you're a 10-person company, you might have 2 man days for the first year, and then maybe a man day and a half the year after that, for example. So it all really depends, and it all depends on the size of the facility, essentially, because they also need to go around and interview the employees and talk to the employees to ensure that they've been trained, they understand their SOPs, and they're following the management system that you have set out for them to follow. So a lot of that time is employee interviews, and they don't interview everyone. It's a sample set, but they want to interview some employees in every department to ensure that there's alignment to the GMP process internally.
Okay, and then one more question. I think you've answered it. Does GMP, once you get certified, do you get audited every single year? Is it like every 12 months? And is it the same process, or are they just, or are they just looking for holes, or do they go through that whole process again? You said it's
Well,
quicker.
yeah, it is an annual review, and typically the next year's audit is determined on the scope of next year's audit, or the agenda is impacted by what happened last year. So if you had major issues in a couple departments, the next year the auditor is going to come in and really focus on those other departments, but not the departments that passed in flying colors, not spend that much time on it. So it all depends, and really having that initial review go really well is an important element to ensuring that you have easier audits moving forward. Now, having said that, audits happen and corrective actions happen. And if you go through the audit process, you get a corrective action, you did not fail. So don't think of it as a failure, and think of it as an opportunity to improve your system, and take the auditor's feedback with grace, and take it knowing that they're trying to help you improve. They're not there to get you; they're there to actually help you, because their job is to ensure that companies are following the rules and the consumers are safe to consume your product.
That's important. And one more thing, you don't normally get unannounced inspections with GMP certification.
No,
Or you do? You do
No,
not.
you do not. No, you know when they're coming.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. This has been very helpful, Chris. I know we could keep talking for a long time, but I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So as we wrap up, I'd like to invite anybody, if there's questions that, you didn't ask, or, we didn't answer, definitely reach out to either of us, especially Chris, after the event. I've said it before, but we are all in this industry together, and together we will make the cannabis industry stronger with products that can be truly life-changing. So if you'd like to learn more about ProCanna or schedule a demo, please visit our website at ProCanna-USA.com. If you'd like to learn more about Chris, please find him on LinkedIn or email him at chris@isolocity.com. And to learn more about Isolocity, the address is on the banner, but please visit isolocity.com. So thanks again, Chris, and thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a good one.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone. Ciao.
See ya.